Welcome to the deep dive. You know that ABBA song, Happy New Year?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Everyone's singing it, hoping for champagne and fireworks. But then, January hits.
And suddenly you're feeling less lost in Moscow and a lot more lost in, say, the post-holiday laundry pile.
Exactly, that emotional whiplash, it's a real thing. And today, we're going to unpack the science behind why we crash so hard. So our mission is to dive deep into your source material, which is a big literature survey on, well, the feeling of lost and blue after New Year party.
And the data shows this is far more than just, common sadness. We're talking about a really well-documented emotional crash.
So this is an actual phenomenon.
Absolutely. A Harris poll analysis showed that 33% of Americans report seasonal depression. Get this, 31% specifically say January depression is because of the post-holiday blues.
Wow, that's nearly 1 in 3 people. Like our whole calendar is structured to set us up for this.
It really is. And the sources show these spikes get really dramatic for certain groups. For employed people, it's up to 38%.
Okay.
But for parents who are managing their own return to work and the kids going back to school, that number jumps to 45%.
45. That's huge.
It is. And even broader, the National Alliance on Mental Illness says 64% of people feel stressed during the holidays.
So the stress of the event itself just feeds into the sadness after it's over.
It's a huge contributor. And what's also fascinating is how it shows up differently. The research notes that men actually report post-holiday blues more than women, 40% versus 24%.
Really? And what's the trigger for them?
It's primarily returning to work.
So for men, the trigger is the sudden appearance of a spreadsheet.
You could say that, whereas women tend to be more sensitive to, the weather and the lack of sunlight. And we also see younger adults, those 18 to 34, are way more likely to make mental health New Year's resolutions. It's 48% of them versus just 13% of the 65 and over group.
So the younger generation is more aware of these mood swings and they're, trying to get ahead of them?
It seems so. They're definitely more tuned in to it.
Okay, let's get into the core mechanism here. Why the sudden drop? It really comes down to brain chemistry, doesn't it?
It does. It's all about dopamine.
The currency of motivation and reward in your brain.
Exactly. So think about the whole lead up to New Year's, the entire holiday season. It's like a neurochemical marathon.
Right, that anticipation phase.
Yeah, the shopping, the planning, giving gifts, all the parties. Your dopamine levels are constantly elevated. Your brain's reward system is just on a sustained turbo boost.
And that leads to the main concept from your literature.
Yes, the dopamine cliff. It's an abrupt, just precipitous decline when all that high-level stimulation suddenly stops.
A cliff, not a ramp. That really explains the intensity. But why can't the brain just smoothly return to normal?
Because the crash is a lot like, it's basically kind of withdrawal phenomenon. When you have that sustained high, your brain dials down its own sensitivity to adjust.
It gets used to the high.
It gets used to it. So when the parties stop, you're left with this huge neurochemical deficit compared to where you were a week before. It's like you've maxed out an emotional credit card and now the balance is zero.
And that deficit, that's what causes all the symptoms.
That's it. The fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, the intense irritability over tiny things, and that awful feeling of not being able to start anything.
That pervasive sense of meaninglessness.
Exactly. It makes just returning to normal life feel impossible.
And the sources gave us a great model for this from research into ADHD.
Yes, because populations with dysregulated dopamine dynamics model this perfectly. The crash mirrors their three-phase cycle. First hyperarousal, then acute reactivity, and then this long deficit recovery period.
So you literally just have to wait for your brain to catch up.
You do. The neurological structures have to restore their normal output, and that takes time.
And as if a dopamine cliff wasn't bad enough, January happens in the dark.
Precisely. This neurochemical exhaustion makes us so much more vulnerable to seasonal affective disorder, or SAD.
Right. SAD affects what, about 5% of the U.S. population clinically?
It does, and another 10 to 20% get the milder winter blues. And January and February are the peak months in the Northern Hemisphere.
So the biological vulnerability and the neurochemical crash just line up perfectly.
A perfect storm. The short days have a cascading effect. Less sunlight means less serotonin, which you need for mood stability.
And more melatonin, which makes you tired.
Right, so you're lethargic. And on top of that, your morning cortisol, your natural alarm clock, doesn't reset properly. So you get this chronic, unshakable fatigue that just piles on top of the post-party letdown.
So biology sets the stage for the crash. But let's talk about the psychological traps we set for ourselves that make it even worse.
The big one here is something called affective forecasting, basically, how we predict our own future emotions.
And we're not very good at it, are we?
We are terrible at it. Foundational research from psychologists like Wilson and Gilbert identified this thing called impact bias. We consistently overestimate both the intensity and the duration of how we'll feel after a future event.
So we imagine this perfect New Year's Eve.
And that fantasy itself generates dopamine. It feels good to imagine it, but reality can never live up to that perfect dopamine-fueled simulation. So the disappointment is, in a way, baked right into the anticipation.
It's like we're hardwired to be let down by New Year's because we're just too good at imagining it. And we forget that we felt this way last year and the year before.
That's the core of the arrival fallacy. You think getting to the celebration is the goal, but arriving there gives you way less sustained happiness than the journey of looking forward to it did.
And the cognitive mechanism behind this is called focalism, right?
Exactly. With focalism, we focus intensely on the main event, the party, the countdown, the champagne, and we completely ignore all the, peripheral life circumstances.
Yeah, we just conveniently forget that the bills are still due, work starts on Monday, and the house is a mess.
That's a perfect way to put it. We ignore the routine, the drudgery, the financial stress that are all guaranteed to come rushing back the second the party's over.
So if we just forced ourselves to think about those things a little bit during the anticipation.
The research is clear on this. You'd significantly reduce those forecasting errors. You'd be preparing yourself for the return to Earth.
That makes so much sense.
Okay.
Okay, the last psychological piece is the famous hedonic adaptation, the hedonic treadmill.
Yes. This theory basically says we have a stable baseline level of happiness, and we return to it pretty quickly after big life events, good or bad.
But there's a catch here.
There is. And the kicker in your sources is that we adapt much faster to positive experiences, like a great party. We just sort of explain them away, and they become our new normal almost instantly.
And that leads directly to the contrast effect.
It does. Because the holiday was so stimulating and high arousal, your normal routine, the quiet office, the commute, feels incredibly dull by comparison.
So the disappointment isn't real, it's just created by the comparison.
It's largely a cognitively constructed feeling. We feel sad not because January is inherently awful, but because our memory of December was artificially high.
Okay, so if you're listening and this is all sounding way too familiar, what does this actually look like? The symptoms can be pretty severe.
They can really resemble clinical depression. You've got that persistent sadness or emptiness, the debilitating fatigue, and often hypersomnia, sleeping too much.
And a loss of interest in things you usually love.
Exactly. But here's the crucial clinical distinction. This letdown is transient. The symptoms usually show up within a day or two and then resolve over 2 to 4 weeks as your body resets.
That 2 to 4 week window is key. Major depressive disorder lasts for months. So if you're past that window, or if symptoms are really severe, it's time to seek professional help.
Absolutely. And beyond the neurobiology, there are other pressures. The financial strain is a big one. That credit card statement arrives in January, and it can cause a lot of anxiety.
And the unmet expectations. The dream of a perfect holiday versus the reality of, your actual family.
That clash is huge. And the third factor that really stands out in the source material is emotional labor.
The idea of emotional masking.
Yes, psychiatrist Judith Orloff talks about this. It's the pressure to, put on a happy face, suppress any conflict, just perform for the sake of the holiday spirit.
We've all been there. You're just on for hours, navigating difficult conversations.
And when that performance is over, you're not just tired. There's this profound sadness from realizing you were performing instead of just being yourself.
And on top of all that, you lose the one thing that was keeping you going.
You lose the anticipation, the planning, the shopping, just looking forward to it. That generates its own dopamine. When the event is over, that future-looking energy is just gone, leaving this emotional vacuum.
Okay, so how do we climb back up this cliff? The first step is just normalizing it, right? And then taking action.
Exactly. And the sources highly recommend an approach called behavioral activation therapy, or BAT.
Behavioral activation, how does that work?
Well, it reverses the usual cycle. Instead of waiting to feel better so you can do things, BA says you have to do things, especially meaningful things, to get that reward exposure, which then improves your mood.
So you don't wait for the feeling, you create the feeling by scheduling the activity first. That's so counterintuitive.
It is, but it's highly effective. So instead of when I feel better, I'll go to the gym, you schedule the gym now. And it needs to be rewarding. Calling a friend or working on a hobby is better than just, say, cleaning the kitchen.
I love that shift from passive to active recovery. Another strategy is cognitive reappraisal, or reframing.
Yes, and this takes real mental effort. You have to actively argue with your own negative narrative.
So instead of seeing the end of the holidays as a loss,
You reframe it as an opportunity for rest. Or, and I love this one, you interpret the letdown as proof that you were deeply engaged. The sadness means it mattered to you.
that's a powerful reframe. And we can also be proactive during the holidays with things like savoring and gratitude.
Savoring is just deliberately amplifying a positive experience. Spend 5 minutes looking at photos or writing down one specific good moment. You're consciously extending the benefits.
And to fight that loss of anticipation, we use future planning.
Yes. Since planning itself generates dopamine, you schedule new things to look forward to. Even small things, like a weekend trip or starting a new class, can offset that post-celebration void by creating positive feelings right now.
And for people who know they're prone to this, what are the preventive steps?
One is anecdotal forecasting. You deliberately think about the real-world stressors even during the celebration. It moves you from that pure focalism to a more realistic outlook.
So you acknowledge the high, but you stay grounded in reality.
Exactly. And you should also have routine transition protocols. A structured return to your normal routine. Don't go cold turkey. Ease back into consistent sleep times, exercise, social contact. It mitigates the shock. And finally, practice acceptance. Don't fight the negative feelings, just tolerate them. Trying to suppress them usually just makes them last longer.
Okay, let's wrap this deep dive up with the key takeaways for you. First, the post-holiday blues are a real neurobiological event. It's the dopamine cliff meeting the seasonal vulnerability of January. It is chemistry, not a character flaw.
That's the most important thing to remember.
Second, our own brains trip us up. Psychological traps like impact bias and focalism mean we're wired to overestimate happiness and then crash when reality can't match our fantasy.
We set ourselves up for the fall.
And third, recovery is an active process. It relies on behavioral activation forcing engagement and mental reframing like cognitive reappraisal and savoring to build real, sustainable satisfaction.
And the big picture takeaway here is that this whole phenomenon isn't weird or surprising. It just reflects the predictable limits of our brains. So understanding the mechanism should help you normalize the experience and maybe even prepare for next year.
Absolutely. Thank you for providing the source material for this deep dive. We hope this was helpful, and you know where to subscribe for more deep dives to keep you well informed.
Thanks for listening.
But that leaves us with one final thought for you to chew on. If our brain gets a dopamine hit, not just from experiencing joy, but from anticipating it, does that mean the real secret to sustained happiness lies not in achieving the perfect future, but in mastering the art of the perfect sustainable plan? We'll let you ponder that until next time.